We never even got a chance to go to a circus or a play like that. We never had a chance to do anything like that. Number one, we were poor, we didn't have the money, and the next thing, we just weren't allowed.
Know that black theater is not only an entertainment, but it is a form of history. We're missing big pieces of our history.
This is a tale of two cultural cities in Dallas, and the black community struggled to provide a dynamic and consistent artistic voice in spite of.
Dallas has a racial history, a very fraught racial history. And that history did not in any way skip over the arts.
By the early 20th century, Dallas's artistic divide was clear in the presence of a plethora of offerings for white Dallas: a bustling opera house, museum, theaters to show both film and vaudeville shows, and Elm Street's Theater Row, known for its growth of fine regional theaters in the heart of the city. While east of downtown in Deep Elm, otherwise known as Deep Ellum, members of the black community gathered at small dives to experience a burgeoning music scene rife with blues and jazz, and one of two theaters in Dallas to enjoy film and vaudeville acts.
Deep Ellum was, I guess, for several blocks was lined up with stores. And Saturday afternoon, it would be like a parade. You would see blacks on both sides of the street. Before you get to the Harlem Theater, I believe it was called White and Green Cafe, where you got your big hot dogs and your big cold drinks, and everybody enjoyed it.
Two men embodied the distinctive, disparate journeys toward growing a thriving artistic presence in Dallas: Sherman Houston Dudley and Carl Hoblitzell. Both men possessed a similar vision to establish a vaudeville circuit for their populations. Carl Hoblitzell co-founded the Interstate Theaters Company, a chain of vaudeville theaters that would later transition into movie theaters. Dudley's business was always considered less prestigious because it was black-owned. He sold his chain to a cinema company in 1930, thus erasing his name and legacy from Dallas history. Hoblitzell, on the other hand, became a major real estate owner and philanthropist who, at the time of his death, left millions of dollars to establish a foundation in his name that continues to positively impact Dallas today. Predominantly white-owned theater establishments were more likely to be funded by the city at the exclusion of black companies. Many of the white companies not only received monetary support, but also their own buildings to operate. How ironic that most of the prosperous arts organizations in Dallas today are located in an area once called home by ex-slaves, a place where most theaters of color cannot even afford to operate.
I got involved with an organization called the Dallas Minority Repertory Theater. We did multicultural productions. We started an organization called Ghetto Arts Theater, which later became the Afro-American Artist Alliance. Our philosophy was to take theater where there was very little artistic activity.
I used to take my students to the Dallas Theater Center to see plays, and some of them were involved in, they had a group out there, dance plays. I met Reginald Montgomery, who was the director of the Janus plays.
The first professional production I remember seeing I must have been in my early teens, we went to see the Janus Players production of The Blacks. And I specifically remember being very impacted by that because, first of all, there were people in it that I knew, and I'd never seen that kind of theater. The landscape was, like everything else in Dallas, segregated. Not necessarily called segregated, but you pretty much knew that these people were doing this and these people were doing that, and there wasn't a lot of necessarily a lot of interaction, perhaps. And there certainly wasn't the same level of support from the city coffers.
Even though there's no physical building that's a foundation of Black theater in my city, there is a legacy of it here. And it sort of planted the seed for me to say, we need physical space. That legacy needs to stand on something.
Jubilee has its own space in the Arts District. That's intentional. That city values that company and values having Jubilee's voice, Circle Theater, Stage West, all of these different voices, theatrical voices, and different points of view in the heart of their city, in their arts district, for their citizens. That speaks volumes.
I always say that when there's no political will to have equity become a reality, then anything you design just becomes something that's a plan that sits on a shelf. We had a very good cultural policy that was developed with a lot of community input and what have you back in the late 80s, early 90s. And had it been implemented fully, we wouldn't be talking about a lot of the issues that we're talking about today.
Is there a struggle or a lack of as much of a value for theater in the African American community in Dallas because of the inconsistency that our community has had in the presence of a sustainable African American based theater?
I definitely have seen changes. I think the major changes have been around the caliber of work that I now see, which is on par with anything that I would see on Broadway or in Chicago or in LA or any of the places where professional work is being done by Black artists. But what isn't different is the support that these organizations and artists are getting. You know, we are still struggling to gain the respect and the financial resources that the white counterparts are getting.
There are things that have happened in my lifetime right here in Dallas. People who are very important that our young people don't know anything about.
So many Black theater companies have come and gone in Dallas. Without the attainment of equity, there will never be a consistent and sustainable legacy of quality voices in Black theater. The need to control our narrative, to develop our stories, drives our existence. In spite of the struggles, in spite of all of these things, we exist. Black theater exists.
I'm seeing a lot more professionals doing work that is being picked up by the local theater companies. You know, we have people like Jonathan Norton winning national prizes for work that originated in a Black space.
In the next 5 to 10 years, we see ourselves having a home of our own, being fully staffed, finally, and doing what we do on just the highest level.